Hi guys, Even Cedric and welcome back to another video, and today we are going to be doing the second part of the East-based trilogy with State of Decay. Now, so far out of State of Decay and East-based, Full Circle, sorry, State of Decay was my preferred story out of the two. It was wrote by writer Terrence Dicks, who'd been in a lot of stories. He'd done Robot and a lot of Pertwee ones. He'd also co-wrote the War Games, a very popular story. So going into this, I thought quite high things of it. Also, the Fourth Doctor and Romana are both in this, which are some of my favourite companion pairings. So that was also good. But before I get into this, just if you like this video, or go watch some more videos and possibly think about liking and subscribing, as that does help me out. But back to the story itself. The whole plot of State of Decay is the Doctor has moved on after Full Circle with Romana through E-Space to try and find a way out of E-Space. They've landed on this planet and they found out that there is people here, or slaves, and these slaves work for this higher up. Basically, like a lot of the stories of that time period, where there's these lower class people and the higher up people, and the lower people want to try and overthrow them, type thing, but with a twist, because in this story, it's supposed that the three higher up people are vampires, which is an interesting concept, because, you know, that's like mixing sci-fi with like a myths and legends type thing, which Doctor Who has done before and it'll do again. I mean, Time Monster and Underworld and stuff like that, and Horns and Imon, stuff like similar to that, but I think more apparent with the State of Decay. Anyway, these three villains, or the vampires, end up working for this basically uber vampire, kind of like massive vampire type thing, and this vampire is supposedly from the days of Rassilon, and Rassilon destroyed its whole race, except from last minute, this vampire managed to hit the same space-time event that the Doctor and Romana fell through, meaning he went into E-Space like the Doctor and Romana. However, this vampire was so powerful that it could bring people from another world, from Earth to this world in E-Space, because he was that powerful. However, he didn't have enough power to actually take himself out, which is why he needed the three humans on the ship, which became vampires, to, help him and save him. Honestly, I think going into this one, as I said, this was the highest expectations for me. Full Circle, I had not heard much about, but State of Decay, I'd heard a little bit about. I'd also obviously knew who the writer was, unlike Full Circle, because it was wrote by Andrew Smith, who I think only wrote Full Circle. The State of Decay was wrote by a well-known writer, at least for the time, considering he did quite a lot, and even script editor for a couple of years. In terms of focus, he's absolutely nailed it. I think he definitely knew how to play Tom's character. Having two other stories with Tom, this being his third and final one, obviously with Tom being quite spread out, because the first Tom Baker story, Robot, was wrote by Terrence Dicks. Second one, Horror Fang Rock, a really good story, again wrote by Terrence Dicks. So he definitely knew how to write Tom Baker's character, and he also seemed to do quite well with Romana. And Romana did quite a lot in this story, similar to Tom. Tom did loads in this story, but Romana also took kind of quite a front in this story, doing a decent amount. There's only two main criticisms I have with the story. First criticism is Idric is awful in this story. Most times I'm not a fan of Idric. I think there's two stories when I'll give Idric a pass and be like, he's okay in this. State of Decay, he just fumbles around. I understand that obviously the Doctor didn't know he was on the TARDIS, so the Doctor couldn't necessarily have said, "Oh, Idric, be careful of this, this, and this," and Idric would have been like, "Oh, thanks, Doctor, for staying. Make sure I'll stay with you." He kind of does his own thing. He manages to get himself into a bit of a mess, and then he then gets himself pretty much captured by one of the vampires, Orkram, and basically becomes hypnotised by him, and that means Romana has to go and save him, which is annoying because it means Romana almost gets captured and, leaves Tom Baker by himself for a little bit. And another big issue I have with this story, although it doesn't affect the chemistry between Tom and Lalla Ward, the first episode is more of a TARDIS-based story. We get the outside context, so Orkram and the other two vampires doing everything out in the world. We see what the lower class non-vampire people are doing, but for most of the first episode, Tom and Lalla Wood are both in the TARDIS with K9, so K9 gets a bit of a mention, obviously, by being in it, so he does a little bit more than he probably would have done, but still, he was kind of out of this story. One thing I will say, though, about definitely the whole 4 parts, especially part 1, part 2 and 3, part 4 it kind of dips a bit, mainly because, as I said, Romana goes and has to save idric when the Doctor goes to do something else. But especially in these first 3 episodes, Tom Baker and Lalla Ward are such a fun pair to watch. They bounce off each other really well. They're so funny together. And a lot of the times when, unlike someone like Clara, who I'm not a fan of in the new series, when Clara sometimes comes up with these ideas and you question how she came up with that idea. But a lot of the times in this, when Tom comes up with a solution, they've kind of led up to this, and also he's done a lot of these kind of things in the past, so we're quite smart. And a lot of the times Lalla Ward figures things out, and I think the 2 notable ones are when she mentions that in all Type 40 TARDISes, there was something to do with the massive uber vampire in this story, and she's not like they've gone, oh yeah, Lalla Ward or Romana just knew that. She just happened to know it for the context of the story. In context of the story, she actually worked at a place where they installed these things, or at least at a library where they were told about these things, which she then told Tom Baker because she knew the Doctor at least had a Type 40 TARDIS, which I think was really smart. The other time, she found the panel, like the escape hatch in the main throne room of the vampires, and it wasn't that she just stumbled on it or something like that. She worked out, him and Tom also helped a little bit, but she worked out there would be some sort of panel help getting out, and she found it. So she used that knowledge that, especially with Tom explaining that they sometimes have them, she used her knowledge and she applied it to other situations, where sometimes Clara just comes up with things without actually having any knowledge applying to that situation, or not having the context linking back to why she would know about it, which is why I think this does this a lot better. Now, including, because we've got these 3 vampires, which, although I think the story tries to convince you that they're not the main threat, are the main threat, because unfortunately, this isn't got the budget of the new series, and I have a sneaking suspicion that if State of Decay was maybe with 12, something like 12, and maybe Clara, considering Clara has that Romana type, although I'm not much as a fan of her having it, because she was a human, not a Time Lord. But still, if you had 12 and maybe Clara in this story, in State of Decay, and they put it into the new series, I think the Uber Vampire guy would have taken more of a substantial role, because in the end of this story, at the climax of part 4, we see the Doctor staring at this vampire, and he sticks his hand out of the ground, and then basically I think Tom blows him up with the rocket. The rocket kind of burns him and he just dies, and that's it. That's it. They built him up so much and then he dies. It's like if, for comparison, I don't know, they built up Davros in Genesis, and we first meet him in Genesis in that first scene, and then he instantly gets killed by somebody who was a spy. That would literally have it would have been, and I think it was underwhelming. However, I think in terms of context of the story, I think it makes more sense, because it would have been harder for them to bring this massive uber vampire in, because at full power he would definitely have been able to overthrow the Doctor, but also it would make less sense to bring him in now, because, you know, he would be so powerful that he'd probably beat the Doctor, he'd be able to get back into his own time at full power, and he'd destroy Gallifrey, so there would be more plot holes, I suppose, if he was stayed in. However, I think it would have been smarter if they tried to make him more of an active part in the story, maybe even saying that he can control some certain situations. So like the bats that go and spy on the Doctor, try and find the Doctor, it might have been smart if maybe, I don't know, rather than the bats, the vampire kind of could control people, some of the village people, some of the rebels, who I haven't really mentioned because they're not that massive in this story. They're just kind of like your average, we'll just help the Doctor type thing because we want change, and he just kind of happens to be smart and knows how to get change type thing. But yeah, honestly, he could have been more of part of a story. But anyway, State of Decay is a pretty cracking story, and honestly, I think this is quite underrated in terms, especially in terms of this season, because this season 18 has been definitely underrated a lot of the time, and it's a cracking season with some great stories in. But yeah, and hopefully in a couple of weeks' time you'll get to see Warriors Gate, which will conclude the E-Space trilogy, and as a bonus at the end of Warriors Gate I will rank them. But if you have enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, as it does help me out. But yeah, see you.